What if I told you that while the world was celebrating a ceasefire in Southeast Asia, four nations you've probably never thought twice about just triggered the most sophisticated distraction operation in military history? I'm talking about a coordinated silent activation that makes every Cold War spy game look like child's play. And here's the kicker. By the time you realize what's happening, the real war won't be where anyone's looking. So the Thailand-Cambodia ceasefire got signed at noon today, right? Everyone's breathing this collective sigh of relief. Diplomats are shaking hands. News anchors are talking about peace in our time. But here's what literally nobody's discussing. Four nations with zero media spotlight just went to a military posture that intelligence analysts are calling Condition Amber. And if you know anything about military readiness codes, Amber isn't the one you want to see before bedtime. These aren't your typical geopolitical players. We're talking about countries that have mastered the art of being so unremarkable that they've become invisible. And that invisibility, that's the whole point. Let me paint you a picture of what's actually going down right now. While every intelligence agency on the planet is focused on that handshake in Bangkok, four separate nations spread across 3 continents have quietly mobilized reserve units, activated communications blackout protocols, and moved strategic assets into position. The wild part, they've done it so smoothly that even satellite surveillance couldn't catch the pattern until it was way too late. We're talking about logistical movements disguised as routine exercises, personnel recalls masked as administrative reshuffling, and weapon systems testing that looks like standard maintenance. It's honestly insane how coordinated this is. The 4 silent nations we're talking about aren't who you'd expect. Forget the usual suspects. This isn't Russia or China playing 4D chess. These are mid-tier powers that have been flying under the radar for decades, building capabilities while everyone else was distracted by the loud players. Think nations with legitimate militaries but low media profiles. Countries with strategic geography that nobody remembers until it's too late. Places where a sudden military activation doesn't immediately trigger every alarm bell in Washington or Brussels. Because let's be real, who's got Paraguay or Kazakhstan or Myanmar or Uzbekistan on their daily threat assessment checklist? Exactly. Nobody. And that's precisely what makes this so brilliant and so terrifying. Here's where it gets absolutely wild. The Thailand-Cambodia situation, that wasn't just some random border dispute that happened to resolve itself at the perfect moment. Intelligence chatter that's leaking out right now suggests that conflict was essentially stage-managed from the beginning. Not by Thailand or Cambodia themselves, but by external actors who needed exactly this kind of international distraction. You create a crisis that's significant enough to grab headlines, but contained enough that it can be resolved on command. Every major power sends diplomatic resources to Southeast Asia. Every news cycle focuses on the ceasefire negotiations. Every intelligence analyst is trying to figure out the regional implications. Meanwhile, the actual operation is happening in 4 completely different locations that nobody's watching. The genius of this distraction war is the timing. Right now, we're in this weird geopolitical moment where everyone's exhausted from the last few years of crisis after crisis. Ukraine fatigue is real, Middle East tension is constant, background noise, and the Taiwan situation has everyone's nerves fried. So when a good news story breaks, an actual ceasefire, actual peace, the global response is to exhale and look away for a second. That second is all you need. That's when you move your pieces into position. That's when you activate protocols that have been dormant for years. That's when you execute phase 1 of an operation that's probably been in planning for the better part of a decade. Let's talk about what these silent nations are actually doing with their window of invisibility. First off, we're seeing massive cyber operations that are staying just below the threshold of what would trigger international response. We're talking about infiltration of critical infrastructure systems, but not activation, just positioning. It's like having 1,000 digital sleeper agents embedded in power grids, financial systems, and communications networks, all waiting for a go signal. The scary part, this kind of intrusion can sit dormant for months or years before anyone even knows it's there. By the time you detect it, the damage is already done. On the conventional military front, these nations are executing what analysts call salami slicing tactics, making moves so small that no single one justifies a major international response, but collectively they add up to a total strategic shift. Picture this: one nation suddenly has 3 times as many troops on a border, but they're technically on their own soil, so what are you going to do about it? Another quietly nationalizes foreign assets from rival powers, but frames it as domestic economic policy. A third starts running naval exercises in waters that are technically international but strategically critical. And the fourth? They're playing host to advisors from other powers that definitely aren't supposed to be there. None of it is technically an act of war. All of it is setting the stage for one. Now here's what happens when you've got four coordinated actors making simultaneous moves while everyone's distracted. The global security architecture that's been holding things together since World War II, that whole system of alliances, mutual defense pacts, and collective security, it starts to creak. Because the system was designed to respond to obvious aggression, not this kind of distributed ambiguous maneuvering. NATO's Article 5 is crystal clear about responding to armed attacks. But what do you do when nothing's technically been attacked yet? When it's all just concerning developments and provocative actions that diplomats want to handle through channels. The economic warfare component of this is low-key, even scarier than the military stuff. While everyone's watching the ceasefire ceremony, these silent nations are executing coordinated moves in commodity markets. One's sitting on rare earth minerals that are critical for basically all modern technology. Another controls key shipping routes that handle like 15% of global trade. The third has been quietly buying up foreign debt and currency reserves. And the fourth? They're positioned to shut down energy supplies to multiple regions at once. You put all that together, and you've got an economic stranglehold that doesn't require firing a single shot. They can crater economies just by turning off the tap, or refusing to ship. Let's get real specific about what a week from now might look like if this keeps escalating. Imagine you wake up and suddenly diesel fuel prices have doubled overnight, because shipping routes through a critical strait are now unsafe for transit. Your phone's acting weird because the server farms that handle half the internet backbone are in a region that just went dark. The stock market's in free fall because three nations simultaneously announced they're dumping their dollar reserves. And the news is still barely catching up, still trying to explain how we got here, still interviewing experts who are straight up baffled because this wasn't the war they were preparing for. The military flashpoints that could ignite from this are honestly terrifying to game out. You've got NATO suddenly looking at threats from directions they haven't seriously considered since the Cold War ended. You've got China trying to figure out if this helps or hurts their strategic position. Do they back these silent nations as a coalition against Western influence, or do they see them as chaos agents disrupting everyone's plans? Russia's probably ecstatic, because anything that divides attention and resources is good for them. India's scrambling because their entire security doctrine is based on threats from specific directions, and suddenly the threat matrix just got way more complicated. Here's a scenario that keeps intelligence analysts up at night. What if this isn't even the main event? What if these four silent nations aren't trying to start World War III themselves? They're trying to create the conditions where the actual major powers have no choice but to go at it. Think about it. You engineer a crisis that pulls the United States into overextending their commitments. You create situations where China feels they need to secure their periphery right now before the window closes. You give Russia opportunities they can't pass up. And suddenly the big dogs are fighting while you're positioned to pick up the pieces. That's some serious strategic thinking. And it's honestly way more sophisticated than just rolling tanks across a border. The response from major powers is going to be messy as hell. By the time Western intelligence agencies finish comparing notes and realize what's happening, these silent nations have already achieved their initial objectives. Now you've got this nightmare scenario where responding proportionally is basically impossible because the aggression was distributed across multiple actors and domains. Do you sanction all four nations simultaneously? That could push them into forming an actual alliance, which makes everything worse. Do you go after them one at a time? They've got time to adjust, and you look weak and indecisive. Do you ignore it and hope it blows over? That's basically giving them everything they want and telling every other mid-tier power that this playbook works. The humanitarian impact of this kind of distraction war is something we seriously need to talk about. We're not even discussing the potential for actual combat yet, and already you've got populations that are about to get hammered. Supply chain disruptions mean food insecurity in regions that import basically everything. Economic warfare means currency collapses and savings being wiped out overnight. The refugee flows from unstable regions are going to make previous migration crises look manageable. And here's the thing that really gets me. These aren't the nations that are typically on humanitarian watch lists, so the aid infrastructure to respond just isn't there. By the time the international community mobilizes help, you're already looking at a catastrophe. The information warfare component deserves its own breakdown because it's absolutely critical to how this all works. These silent nations have clearly learned from watching Russia's playbook in 2016 and China's influence operations. They're not trying to win hearts and minds. They're trying to create enough confusion and division that nobody can mount an effective response. You flood social media with contradictory narratives. You've got bot farms pushing conspiracy theories that make people doubt official sources. You leak selective intelligence that makes everyone look bad. And you time it all so that by the time fact-checkers debunk one wave of disinformation, 3 more have already taken root. The result? Democratic societies are paralyzed by internal debate while authoritarian systems can act decisively. Let's talk about what happens to global alliances when this scenario plays out. The European Union is going to be seriously tested because different member states have different exposure to these threats. Poland's threat assessment is completely different from Portugal's. Germany's economic ties create different incentives than Estonia's security concerns. You could easily see the EU fracture over how to respond, which has been a Russian strategic goal for decades. NATO faces similar pressures. Do you really invoke collective defense over ambiguous economic warfare and cyber intrusions? What if some members say yes and others say it doesn't meet the threshold? Suddenly, you've got the most successful military alliance in history questioning its own relevance. The truly wild card in all this is how regional powers respond when they realize they're being used as part of someone else's strategy. India, Brazil, Indonesia, Turkey. These are major players that might suddenly find they've got more in common with each other than with traditional alliances. You could see the emergence of a genuine third bloc that refuses to align with either the Western coalition or the autocratic axis. That's potentially a massive realignment of global power that future historians would mark as the moment the post-Cold War order actually died. And it all started with a ceasefire signing that everyone thought was good news. The technology dimension of this conflict is going to be unlike anything we've seen before. We're not just talking about cyber attacks, we're talking about AI-driven disinformation. Autonomous weapon systems making decisions faster than humans can intervene, space-based assets being targeted or hijacked, and quantum computing potentially breaking encryption that secures everything from banking to military communications. These silent nations have clearly invested in asymmetric tech capabilities that let them punch way above their weight. A single well-placed hack or a few destroyed satellites can cripple a superpower's ability to project force or coordinate response. Here's what nobody wants to admit, but everyone in defense circles is thinking, we might already be in World War III and just haven't recognized it yet, because it doesn't look like the wars we've studied. There's no Pearl Harbor moment, no invasion of Poland, no clear start date that historians will point to. Instead, it's this slow-motion cascade of interconnected crises. Economic warfare, cyber operations, proxy conflicts, and strategic positioning that gradually escalates until suddenly you've got great power conflict, and nobody can quite explain how we got here. That's what these 4 silent nations might have just triggered. Not the war itself, but the conditions that make the war inevitable. So where does this leave us? Sitting here less than 12 hours after a ceasefire that everyone thought was a step back from global conflict. It leaves us staring at the possibility that the next world war won't announce itself with dramatic speeches or border crossings. It'll slip in through the back door while we're all congratulating ourselves on avoiding it. 4 nations you couldn't find on a map last week might have just rewritten the rules of warfare for the 21st century. They've shown that in an interconnected, media-saturated world, the greatest weapon isn't military might. It's the ability to control what everyone's looking at. And right now, we're all looking exactly where they want us to look, which means we're definitely not seeing what's coming next.